Hey folks, welcome to Proper Horror Show. I've got a slightly atypical non-horror related video for you here today. I'm making it because I've watched a lot of intelligent people make a very important mistake. I'm talking about channels that I like, that I subscribe to, people such as Georg Rockel-Schmidt and The Critical Drinker. But the one that particularly motivated me to make this video is The Closer Look and his video, How to Alienate an Audience. And the mistake I'm talking about is the failure to fully understand propaganda. And that misunderstanding means that you are going to miss a lot of propaganda, even when it is hiding in plain sight. Now, the video's title is a cheeky tribute to The Closer Look, whose video discusses propaganda most directly, and handily for me gives examples of non-propaganda that are in fact propaganda. So I'm going to use his video as a springboard for this discussion. I'm going to link it below just so you can make sure that I've been fair in my representation of what he's saying, and I do hope I've understood him correctly. I also want to be clear that I don't intend any of this as an attack or as an own. I think the mistake is actually very widespread. I've seen very intelligent people make it, and so that's why I want to correct it, because I think it does have quite serious implications. Now, I'm going to lay out The Closer Look's key points so you see where I'm coming from and what I'm responding to, but obviously it's going to be best if you watch his video directly. Now, The Closer Look describes how Doctor Who in the Chris Chibnall era alienates its audience by being overtly biased and one-sided in the episode Arachnids in the UK. Now, The Closer Look is of course correct when he says that controversial topics aren't the problem that stop people enjoying the film, but the preachiness is. For instance, in Ridley Scott's Alien from 1979, you have very strong, very one-sided second wave feminist messaging, some anti-porn stuff, some pro-choice messaging, but it is not preachy about it. In fact, you may not even have noticed those themes. In his video, The Closer Look distinguishes art from propaganda, giving this definition of the latter. Now, that's fine, we can work with that, we'll modify it later, but it's a very good starting point. And he points to balanced discussion, that is the presence of differing viewpoints on a matter, as a sign that something is art and not propaganda. Now, to be fair, he does also refer to propaganda as being on a spectrum, which might refer to the preachiness or to the bias or how important the message is to the film, but I think his distinction of art from propaganda is key to his argument. And very importantly for this video, he points to 3 examples of non-propagandistic art. Those are Saving Private Ryan, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and the incredibly algorithm-friendly American History X. Now, because those all have nuanced, balanced discussion of very controversial topics, they aren't propaganda, right? Now, I do hope that's a fair summary of his argument. I'm not intending to misrepresent anyone. But I think The Closer Look is wrong in a very key and very human way, and I'm going to use his own examples to show the flaw in his thinking, and that is thinking that art and propaganda are separable. Now, I'm going to point to 2 key problems to show why this thinking means that we're going to miss most propaganda. And that is 1, we are blind to most propaganda, especially if we agree with it, and 2, balanced discussion is often a smokescreen. Also, just as A Closer Look had to do, I'm going to be dealing with some very divisive, some very controversial issues, and frankly, I'm almost inevitably going to set off a lot of emotional tripwires, so be wary of that. Try and focus on what the actual argument is. If you want to be misrepresenting me by saying that American History X was a little too harsh on the neo-mid-century Germans, then skip to this time code. I would rather folk not be triggered and listen to the actual arguments, but this is YouTube, so yeah, I know it's coming. And since we're on YouTube, you know what to do. So just as The Closer Look said, the common complaint about new Marvel and new Doctor Who is that it's woke, it's gone political. But the old Doctor Who, like every piece of media, has messaging, intended or otherwise, and we frequently won't notice or even think of it as messaging. Between the following 2 examples, I reckon I'm going to annoy about 90% of you. So picture a scene where the average family is sitting down for a Sunday roast merrily, and we learn from this that eating meat is normal, acceptable and enjoyable. As a vegan, I notice this messaging, and you would certainly notice if instead of a beef joint, they were tucking into a delicious, nutritious tofurkey roast. And there is no big moral struggle over meat eating in the average film. It's normal, so you probably don't even consider it a message that they're eating it. And then consider homosexuality on screen. Now, it used to be taboo and hidden in allegory, and then you get into the 80s and 90s and it's on screen directly, but it's more of a controversial adult topic. And now, in the 2020s, it is borderline mandatory to have gay characters. And that is not hyperbole, by the way. There are large, prominent, well-funded organisations and campaigners pushing for increased representation of LGBT folk in all sorts of media. The BBC in the UK even has a quota of representation to meet. And you will find out that shows actually get negative reviews sometimes if they have insufficient representation of a group that's about 3% of the population. Incidentally, as subscribers will know, I am in that 3% too, so I feel very confident using this as an example. Now, if you watch any Netflix show, literally any of them, do you think that the gay characters there are a controversial or risky choice? Or do you expect it? Do you think it's a message? Having gay characters is not a neutral choice, just ask any editor for Disney when it comes to prepare the Chinese release. Now, I use those specific examples of veganism and homosexuality on screen to show that you can pick up on messaging whether or not you support it. Filmmakers don't necessarily intend to bolster meat eating, and the depiction of homosexuality on screen conveys subtle messages about social acceptance, status and prevalence. The point is, everything carries a message. So at this point, I think we should ask why it is only propaganda when a work aims to make you adopt a point of view. Is it still propaganda when it's reinforcing a view that you already hold? When it's talking about something that you don't even consider a message? Now, I don't think The Closer Look would actually object to us expanding the definition this way, but that original definition is revealing. We have a tendency to think of something as political only when it is promoting a change to the status quo, especially if that change is extreme. But an extreme position is relative, generally, to the contemporary mainstream ideas. Let's look at Captain America, our poster boy for this, and a great example of what I'm talking about. So Steve Rogers, cap to his friends, he's a phlebotomy-enhanced World War II soldier who's frozen in 1945 and reawoken in the 2000s as the face of American heroism and values. But one important question here, do you really think that Steve Rogers, a man straight from the 1940s, would have even a quarter of the values and ideas that the film gives him? He is from a pre-desegregation era, but he's totally fine having a black boss in Nick Fury. He's okay with abortion being both legal and state-funded. This man, straight out of the 1940s, is super cool with gay marriage and Pride Month. You know, that is not even touching on the far spicier question of how keen the average American and Brit was to be involved fighting in World War II. Now, as uncomfortable as it might be to consider, a regular man from the 1940s would be horrified by many aspects of modern society that most of us don't even blink at. Many would find at least some of his representative, accurate opinions to be totally beyond the pale. And as far as I recall, the closest Steve Rogers comes to voicing any 1940s stances is his mild opposition to swearing at the start of Age of Ultron. Our 1940s hero just so happens to share the particular moral and ethical values of 2010's metropolitan liberal writers. But did you notice a switch? Did you think of Captain America's values as propaganda for current permissible opinion? Or are his liberal values secretly a sign of how good a hero he truly is? And going for the first of the Closer Look's chosen examples of non-propaganda, there is a great example of subtle propaganda going completely unseen in Saving Private Ryan. Steven Spielberg's excellent World War II film consistently dehumanizes Germans with a variety of methods. For instance, their deaths are bloodless and unemotive, while American deaths are emotional, agonizing, bloody and tragic. Now, Rob Agar's analysis is the gold standard on this. It is a must-see, and I've linked it below. This is very clear messaging, but it's subtle, and it's messaging that I completely missed. Now onto the second issue that I wanted to highlight that means we're very unlikely to notice propaganda, and that is the issue of balanced discussions, or even the appearance of them, almost certainly being smokescreens. Now, this is likely going to upset many of you. We are primed to react emotionally when our core values are challenged even lightly. Questioning messages that we've deeply internalized that are really important to us, that can feel disturbing to any of us. But I want you to bear in mind that I'm just trying to make the case for why we aren't seeing propaganda here. I am raising things, I'm not always endorsing them, I hope you're aware of this. Now, for a start, remember that generally, this battle of ideas has one writer, and it's a rigged fight. Now that writer might let one side get a good shot in, but they still control everything, so they're going to make the losing side pull their intellectual punches. It's really no different to making the villain's laser gun malfunction at the right moment. 12 Angry Men might be the perfect example of this. As I've shown in a previous video, it has the appearance of an intelligent debate, but it actually manipulates you and deceives you from the moment the jury gets in the room. I'm not going to go over it again now, but I would recommend you watch that video.
And I say your 3-cent titanium tax doesn't go too far enough.
And furthermore, the balanced compromise is generally just the current acceptable opinion. You may have heard of the term the Overton window. This describes the range of socially acceptable political opinions. Almost universally, balanced discussion works within this predefined range, and ultimately, in current year Western countries, the debate settles on the current ruling ideology, individualist liberalism. Now, I had long paragraphs written describing how this position, individualist liberalism, is not in fact a balanced compromise of left and right, but it's beside the point and it's kind of boring. If you are interested in that stuff, here is some reading, but the key point is you pretty much never need to watch the battle of ideas, because you can just ask yourself what the individualist liberal position is. That's your winner. That's your winner right there. So to see this problem in action, the critical drinker, whose stance I rarely disagree with, praised Midnight Mass from Mike Flanagan as a brilliant, nuanced discussion on faith. But having watched and also enjoyed Midnight Mass, I've got to strongly disagree. Why do I think this brave exploration of faith was toothless and lacked any bite? Oh, for key reasons. See, the discussion never left the bounds of liberalism. It was caged by those parameters, and so the discussion was extremely limited and predictable. It was toothless. It was propaganda justifying the current trend. Christianity is bad because it restricts individual self-expression and is anti-egalitarian. Islam is present, but of course not criticised directly, although the same applies because Midnight Mass is stuck in the current paradigm. It is still propaganda, even if it's not pushing for a change of view. And so for the highly cancelable portion of the video, why the closer look was wrong about American History X. American History X tells the story of Derek Vinyard, a neo-Nazi who kills a black burglar and abandons his ideology after a traumatic spell in prison. It's a good film, great performances. It was praised by the closer look for dealing with all angles of the issue of racism in contemporary America, and reportedly, it was not propaganda. Okay. So let's synthesize the points that we've already made in this video about misunderstanding and missing propaganda. So the first objection to the closer look saying that this isn't propaganda is the unseen messages. Do you really genuinely think a film made by a major American studio would discuss neo-mid-century German ideas neutrally? Do you think they would put out a film where there is the slightest chance that the average audience member could conclude, "Oh, fair play, he's got a point there"? Even setting the inclinations of film studios aside, certain of those neo-mid-century German ideas are illegal in many countries, including my own. You couldn't put them on the screen, so yeah. And secondly, Derek's beliefs may have extensive airtime, but his views are firmly and consistently presented as a trauma response. The film's message is that he learned his bigoted thinking from his dad, his prejudices then cemented by his father's tragic death. And that framing shows us that there's never any point at which he may be correct, but only that he's traumatized instead of evil. American History X, as The Closer Look says, is asking us why someone might hold Derek's opinions. This framing is showing us that there is never any point at which the film allows he might be correct, only that the film is moving the explanation for his incorrectness from him being evil to him being traumatized.
So you're saying that by and large, so you're saying women are just more sensible.
And within this framework, the film is suggesting that Derek's grievances are material and psychological, based in ignorance. As Derek is this way because of poverty, trauma and ignorance, providing psychological help and social support programs along with integrated communities mean that his issues can be solved and his bigotry can be cured. He just needs therapy, guys. Now, on some level, sure, it is more mature to shift the framing of the message from Derek is an evil, evil, evil racist to Derek is a bad guy because of socioeconomic factors and trauma. But this is still all safely within the Overton window. We aren't ever looking at his political ideas as if they might conceivably at any point in any way have any wider merit. But you might object. You might say that in this scene, for example, he lists his grievances to incite a racist attack on a supermarket, or a mini-mart, I don't know what you'd call that. And that is a fair objection, and the question then is over what the messaging behind this scene is. Is the film showing us that Derek and others have some genuine concerns, that some aspects of modernity have hurt them and disrupted their lives and then drove them in towards racist domestic terror? Or is it intended to connect some fairly mainstream conservative and traditional concerns with neo-Nazi talking points? You know, to sort of set up that if you have any of these concerns, you're basically on your way to taking part in this kind of activity. And if so, is it making those concerns unthinkable and unsayable and moving them firmly outside of the Overton window by association? It's a second one, really, isn't it? It's a second one. Now that is of course a matter of interpretation and we can never know for certain, but think what was most likely intended. Do you think this was a balanced film asking complicated ethical questions with a morally neutral stance? Or was it propaganda aiming to reinforce a mindset and a paradigm? To zoom out for a moment and consider the bigger picture, The Closer Look referenced two films with Nazis as the villains, both from 1998. It was quite weird that he was able to pick two films from the same year with the same villains, but it's actually kind of understandable when you know that there is a major release pretty much every year that has the mid-century Germans as the villains, World War II as a setting. In fact, here's the same Doctor Who from the Chris Chibnall era doing it.
You're not exactly their Aryan archetype.
But the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and communists are featured only sporadically. They are not your go-to villains. Now you could call that disproportionate focus on one set of villains to the detriment of all the others as a kind of macro level message and framing that orients people's thinking. It makes them react instinctively more harshly to any flavour of traditionalist or right-wing thinking than to communism.
Because I'm literally a communist.
The spectre of the mid-century Germans is ever present in our media. Well, that was all very spicy and I look forward to being thoroughly misrepresented and misquoted. But the point I'm making is, it's still propaganda. Regardless of how you feel about the message, it is still messaging and propaganda. And as for The Closer Look's main example of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which looks pretty darn interesting, the trouble is I've not played it, but using what you've learned in this video, maybe you could look at it yourself. What messages, assumptions and values do you see being conveyed in that example? Maybe you can tell me what it was propaganda for. It may not be as transparently biased, one-sided and awful as Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who, but subtle propaganda that agrees with your worldview, it's still propaganda. And that is my conclusion for you. There is no art-propaganda dichotomy because all art conveys messages. Basically, it's all propaganda. And that's okay. In short, my position is that art made with passion is going to convey messages and value systems because Stories do not work without those things. And if you don't care deeply about something, then your story isn't going to resonate as well. I'm not saying writers should write these one-dimensional straw men that they can ideologically rout. I'd actually say the opposite. I think you should seek out the strongest arguments against your position and write those into the story. I think that makes for a much more entertaining story. But I am also not saying that these stories have to come out neutral, completely perfectly balanced and adjusted for test audiences. I would much rather have 20 very different voices that are embraced and loved by niches, rather than mass-produced, risk-free products that pretty much everyone can say, it was okay, it wasn't offensive. No, I want people to just embrace the bias and tell the story that they care about. That's what I want to see. Yeah, that does leave an awkward question, doesn't it? What was this video propaganda for? What was I pushing? Well, buying tofurkey, of course. They were tucking into a delicious, nutritious tofurkey roast.
That's right. That's right.
Why do I think this brave exploration of faith was toothless and lacked any bite? Oh, for key reasons. Bite, oh, for key reasons. Buy tofurkey reasons. While watching this, you've been steeped in pro-tofurkey messaging the way tofurkey chicken-style pieces are steeped and marinated in delicious barbecue and tikka spice flavours. Tofurkey have a wide array of delicious products that even the most committed meat eater will love. Buy tofurkey today. Oh, and subscribe. That would be great too. Thanks.
Durango 95 purred away real horror show.